Hi, it's JP Gedeon. What a crazy time we're living through. We are living through things we have never seen before, and understandably, it's causing some people to feel anxiety and stress and uncertainty and fear. There's no doubt that this is a time of transformation and that we're going to come out of this different than we came in. But how do we position ourselves as we go through the crisis to be ready for what's ahead? Can we do it in a way that helps us perhaps become even healthier, more grounded, more centered? I'm going to put out a bunch of videos over the next couple of weeks to help with that discussion. Just a series of thoughts. Perhaps we can start a conversation about things we can do while remaining in isolation that help us walk through this transformation and hopefully come out more grounded and more centered than we thought was possible. Today I'm going to talk about fear and anxiety and a little bit about what it is. And then in the future weeks, I'm going to talk about various things we can do to address it. So, let's get started. So let's talk about fear and anxiety and stress and where it crops up in our body and what we can learn from that. Now, fear is something we experience on a daily basis almost, sometimes in negative contexts and sometimes in positive ones. Now, negative context for fear will be if something goes bump in the night, or if we're walking down a dark street and we're perceiving something that might be dangerous. But there's also positive context for fear, like watching a horror movie or lining up to get on a roller coaster. So what's the difference between the negative context and the positive context? And is there a way of helping manage a transition between the two? Well, for that, we kind of need to understand where fear comes from. Fear starts in a small almond-shaped organ in the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for what neuroscientists like to call emotional salience. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying that it scans everything that's coming our way and decides if anything is worth paying attention to. Now, should the amygdala get triggered by something that we think is dangerous, it sets off an entire process in the brain, triggering the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland and eventually causing us to release adrenaline. Now, we all know what adrenaline feels like. You can literally feel your heart quickening and your breath speeding up, and sugar is pumped into our coursing blood to allow our muscles to get ready to jump or fight or whatever it is, and our pupils dilate and our digestion slows down. Basically, it sets us out in a state of hyper readiness for whatever it is that we think is coming our way. Now, hyper readiness might be a good thing if we are leaping out of the way of a car that's just grazing us too closely as we uncautiously cross the street. But what has been found is that living in a state of high stress and anxiety, with these chemicals coursing through our blood for a long period of time, has some very serious health concerns, both physical and mental, right up to some very serious diseases. Now, what is interesting about fear is that it's not only triggered, obviously, by things that go bump in the night or by dark alleys. We have developed over time the capacity to scan the faces of the people around us. This is called emotional contagion. And if we can perceive on their faces fear or anxiety or stress, we ourselves have our own fear processes triggered. It's almost as if we scan the faces of those around us to see if there's something we're missing in the environment that might be scary. But it's not just the faces. It's also the words and the stories that are being told in the area. Spoken word and narrative also triggers fear responses. Now, why does this matter? In all of the news coverage that we are seeing today, and goodness knows we are being flooded with news coverage about COVID-19, we see faces in distress and we hear stories and words that are truly frightening. Now, it's not up to me to state whether or not these broadcasts are sensationalized or not, but what I can state is that they are everywhere, and as a result, they are likely triggering fear responses within us. Our fear responses are usually triggered outside of our own awareness. They happen unconsciously. They happen before we even know that we are experiencing it. And we know that to be the case, because in the case where the car was about to graze us, we've jumped out of the way even before we noticed what we were doing. And so it is almost an automatic response. But it's not all bad news. The good news is that there is another section of our mind called the prefrontal cortex. Now, this section doesn't work alone, but it's basically responsible for executive function in the brain. Executive functions are all those things that we apply deliberately in order to better manage ourselves. And the good news is that the prefrontal cortex can come from a top-down perspective and negotiate with the amygdala and other emotional centers to try to create calmness, intentional perspective. Now remember, at the beginning of this video, I asked what was the difference between the positive fear and the negative fear experiences, and herein lies the answer. The difference is when our prefrontal cortex comes down into the process of anxiety and fear and applies to it a sense of context or a sense of reframing, a sense of social learning, or even a sense of distraction in order to move away from the hyper process and move us towards a state of intentional calmness where we can have self-possession. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be putting out a bunch of videos that are designed to help us understand how we can best mobilize our prefrontal cortex as well as all the resources around us to help us better manage the fear and anxiety that's coming at us from all directions today. We're going to talk about things we can do personally, interpersonally, things we can do at work, as well as things we can do systemically about how we are viewing our lives and the world in general. I hope you will join me either by following me on LinkedIn or accessing my website where I'll have a media page where these videos will be linked. My hope is to start a conversation with all of us to help us better get through this crisis and come out the other side with self-possession, centeredness, groundedness, and hopefully a degree of fulfillment that we didn't think was possible when we started. I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, take care.